black maid, slept on the floor with the baby. The billionaire saw it. And then what happened? Maya Williams stood frozen, her breath catching in her throat as Nathaniel Blake stormed into the room, fury in his eyes. "What do you think you're doing?" he barked, his voice sharp like broken glass. "That's not your place. You serve it. You don't hold it." In one swift motion, he yanked the baby from Maya's arms, his grip cold and forceful. Maya's heart lurched as the baby, barely a few months old, screamed in shock, her tiny fists flailing in the air. The wails only grew louder the moment Maya was no longer holding her. "Shh, it's okay, sweetheart," Nathaniel murmured, but his attempts to comfort the child only made things worse. The baby cried harder, her face turning red as she twisted in his arms. Maya stood, paralyzed with fear and guilt, her chest tight. "I tried everything," she whispered, her voice cracking. "She won't sleep unless I hold her." Nathaniel didn't respond, his jaw set as he glared at Maya. The tension in the room was suffocating. Maya couldn't tear her eyes away from the crying baby, her heart aching with each sob. She could feel the baby's fear, her own heart breaking in sympathy. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Nathaniel's eyes softened with an emotion he couldn't hide. The coldness in his gaze faltered for just a moment. "Give her back," Maya demanded quietly but firmly. Her voice was steady as she took a step forward. Nathaniel hesitated, his expression a mixture of confusion and reluctant defeat. Slowly, he placed the baby back into Maya's arms. Instantly, Lily curled into Maya's chest, her sobs calming as she felt the warmth and safety she so desperately needed. Maya sighed, rocking her gently, murmuring words of comfort. Within moments, the crying ceased. The night passed in a heavy silence, the air thick with unspoken words. Maya sat beside the crib, watching Lily sleep soundly. The baby's tiny chest rose and fell, peaceful for the first time that evening. Maya remained still, her mind racing. She had spent years working in homes like this, learning to stay invisible. But Lily, she was different. By morning, Maya was already up, preparing the nursery for another day. As she tidied up, Mrs. Delaney entered the room, her usual stoic expression softer than usual. She cast a quick glance at the peacefully sleeping child in the crib before turning her gaze to Maya. "She only sleeps with you, doesn't she?" Mrs. Delaney's voice was a whisper, barely more than a breath. Maya nodded silently, still holding the tension of the previous night in her shoulders. "She won't settle for anyone else." Mrs. Delaney gave a knowing look, the silence between them carrying the weight of unspoken understanding. "You're the only one she trusts, Maya. And that's more than just a job," she said, her tone softer than Maya had ever heard. Downstairs, Nathaniel Blake appeared at breakfast, his tie crooked and his coffee untouched. He didn't meet Maya's eyes, but there was a flicker of something in his expression as she passed him by, carrying a folded blanket in her arms. The house felt different now. It was as if everything had shifted, but no one had yet said a word about it. Later that day, as Maya rocked Lily to sleep again, her mind wandered back to the way Nathaniel had looked at her the night before, how he had handed Lily back to her with a strange mixture of regret and confusion in his eyes. For a moment, she wondered if things could ever truly change between them. Would he ever see her as more than just a maid? But no matter what, her focus was clear. Lily needed her, and that was enough. The days passed in a haze of routines and subtle shifts. Maya had been in the Blake house long enough to notice the quiet changes. Nathaniel, once a distant and commanding presence, began to soften, albeit just a little. She saw him in passing, no longer the man who towered over her with icy authority. Now he seemed almost human. The walls between them were still high, but there were cracks in the foundation. She couldn't ignore that. One evening, as she sat in the nursery rocking Lily, she was startled by a soft knock on the door. It was Nathaniel. "I need to talk to you," he said quietly, his voice almost hesitant. Maya nodded and opened the door, stepping outside the nursery, her heart racing as she met his gaze. "I owe you an apology," Nathaniel began, his voice low. "I was wrong the other night, the way I spoke to you. What I said, it was cruel." Maya was silent for a moment, unsure of how to respond. It wasn't often that people apologized to her, especially not people like Nathaniel Blake. But there was something in his eyes now, a vulnerability that wasn't there before. She studied him, her expression calm. "For what?" she asked, her tone steady but not unkind. He paused, his jaw tightening before speaking again. "For everything. For treating you like you didn't matter. For assuming you were just the help." Maya could feel something inside her shift. There was something different in the way he looked at her, not just as a servant, but as a person. Yet she didn't fully trust it. Not yet. "You know Lily knows what's real, right?" he added, his voice softer now. "She doesn't care about titles or money. She just needs someone who makes her feel safe. You're the only one she trusts." Maya nodded slowly. "I know." A long silence followed, broken only by the quiet sound of the baby's breathing drifting from the nursery. Nathaniel looked at her, his expression conflicted. "I'm sorry," he said again, the words carrying more weight this time. Maya finally spoke, her voice low. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "Not because of you, but because she needs me." Nathaniel nodded, his eyes filled with something new, respect maybe, or at least the beginning of it. "For her then," he said quietly. "For her." The following days brought an unexpected shift in the house. Maya moved through her duties with a quiet determination, but now there was a subtle tension in the air, something unspoken between her and Nathaniel. He didn't speak to her as coldly as before, and she didn't avoid him either. They existed in the same space, sometimes exchanging a glance, sometimes sharing silence, but there was no longer that icy divide between them. One evening, while Maya sat at her small desk in the nursery, working through some notes for the baby's care, she heard the familiar sound of Nathaniel's footsteps approaching. He knocked on the door before stepping inside. "I've been reviewing your suggestions for the app," he said, his voice quiet, but his gaze was focused, serious. "The anonymous forum idea. I think it's a good one." Maya looked up, slightly surprised. "You do?" she asked, her voice betraying her cautious optimism. He nodded. "I think you're right. Some women won't raise their hand in public, but they might type in the dark when they feel alone. I want to make that happen." There was something in his tone, something genuine. Maya's heart beat a little faster, but she kept her expression neutral. "I told you," she said softly. "Sometimes it's easier to speak than write, especially when you're scared." Nathaniel sat down beside her, an unspoken weight between them. He seemed different, less guarded. "I built this company around solving problems," he said, his eyes distant for a moment. "But I miss the human ones, the ones you can't just solve with technology." Maya studied him for a moment. She had always known he was smart, but she hadn't expected this. A small, quiet connection began to form between them, as if they both saw each other in a way they hadn't before. The tension that once hung between them was replaced with something softer, an understanding, if not yet trust. "I'll help," Maya said finally, her voice steady. "But I want to be more than just a consultant. I want to be a voice, a part of this, not just in the background." Nathaniel's eyes met hers, and for the first time there was no hesitation in his gaze. "You already are," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I know you are." They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of their unspoken understanding settling between them. For the first time since Maya had come to work for the Blake family, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be. The days blurred together as Maya continued her work with the app. She was becoming more involved, her voice and ideas gaining weight in the development of the project. Nathaniel trusted her, and that trust was changing everything. The house, once so cold and distant, now felt like a strange, growing warmth that she couldn't quite explain. but she still couldn't shake the doubt that lingered in her chest. Could she truly belong here? One evening, after another day filled with meetings and brainstorming sessions, Maya stood by the window in the nursery, watching the snow fall outside. It was quiet, peaceful, except for the low hum of the baby monitor on her nightstand. Lily had just fallen asleep, her tiny body curled under the blanket, looking almost too small for the world outside. Nathaniel entered the room silently, holding 2 mugs of tea in his hands. He approached her slowly, as though not wanting to disturb the quiet peace of the room. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle. Maya glanced at him, then at the snowy landscape outside. She nodded, but something in her eyes told him it wasn't just the winter weather that made her quiet. "I'm just not used to it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Not used to being seen, to being part of something." Nathaniel stood beside her, handing her a mug. His eyes softened as he studied her, as though trying to understand everything that had brought her here. "I see you, Maya," he said quietly. "More than you think." The words hung in the air, heavy but sincere. For a moment, Maya didn't know how to respond. There had been so many times in her life when she had been invisible to those around her, when she was just a maid, a shadow in the background. But here, in this house, with Nathaniel and Lily, she was something more. "I don't trust permanence," Maya admitted, her voice tight with emotion. "I don't trust that things will stay the same." Nathaniel's gaze softened. "I don't either," he admitted, "but I'm willing to try. With you, with us." Maya didn't know what to say. There was too much history between them, too much baggage. But in that moment, something inside her shifted. She wasn't sure if it was trust or hope or something else entirely, but it was enough to make her believe that maybe, just maybe, she had a place here. The next morning, as Maya prepared breakfast for Lily and Nathaniel, she felt a strange sense of peace. The house was alive with the soft rhythm of daily life. Nathaniel was no longer the man who had once ordered her around. He was someone she could count on. And Lily, her little girl, was finally finding the safety she needed in Maya's arms. There was still so much to figure out. The future wasn't clear, and the road ahead wasn't guaranteed. But for the first time in a long time, Maya felt like she was starting to belong somewhere. And that, more than anything, was the first step toward a life that wasn't just about survival, but about beginning again.